Welcome to the Economic Security panel. Since we only have 30 minutes and we're running a little late, I suggest that we have a rather short Q&A on the panel and then open the floor to you for your questions. Let me start with pouring some cold water onto one matter that you mentioned, TTIP. 3 weeks ago, Richard Haas, the president of the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, visited Berlin and gave a speech on transatlantic relations at the American Academy. And after doing so, he was asked why he didn't mention TTIP with a single word. And his reply was, oops. And then he said, to be honest, there's probably not half a dozen people in Washington who know what the abbreviation stands for. So my question to you, who said that you are very optimistic about it, is, are we too optimistic about the American intentions?
I don't know what are the American intentions. There is economic necessity which makes it useful to discuss about this agreement, and this is why it was the debate about this question started. But I think we all have to be very clear about the question how long it will take to be successful. We will have a long debate, we have a long struggle to find good solutions, and this will take some time, but I think it's worthwhile.
Speaking of time, and similar question to you, are we more likely to see a transatlantic or a trans-Pacific free trade agreement?
Oh, I'm certainly not competent to really make a good, precise prognosis on that, but I would agree with Herrn Scholz that the benefits of engaging into such an agreement are so obvious from an economic point of view that it would be lighthearted not to really pursue it in earnest. But of course, the estimates that you have available in terms of jobs gained, in terms of GDP growth gained, they are somewhat on the optimistic side also, because of course, without such an agreement, the world would not stop turning, and many of the trades and many of the activities that you see under such an agreement, you will see without such an agreement as well. So it's very difficult to say what is really the net effect. But in times in which advanced economies are growing in very low numbers, if 1.1% is already great news for the euro area, and 1.6% puts Germany in the moment really in the driver's seat in terms of economic growth. If you consider these times, even 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 percentage points gain in terms of growth would be worthwhile to undertake.
Speaking of the euro crisis, and you mentioned it in your speech, the euro crisis has disappeared from front pages in Germany, at least, and I should say at the moment, because a lot of people in Germany fear that after the European elections in May, there will be a return of the crisis. For instance, people fear that the coalition in Athens might fall apart because of the atomization of the Socialist Party, PASOK, in Athens, or that because in the light of a success of Marine Le Pen's Front National, the French president won't be able to implement his reform agenda. My question to you, Mayor, is are we facing a return of a crisis?
It's very difficult to give expectations about this question, but my point of view is that it will be not mainly politically caused, that a new crisis will come up. So yes, if there is a difficult election in Greece, this will produce problems. And if Marine Le Pen might have success in France, this might produce new problems. But I'm sure that the question whether there will be a crisis in the euro level and in the European economy will have much more to do with what is going on economically. So we will have to handle this upcoming problems afterwards. But the more important question is how, if we can be successful with the progress in the necessary next steps. And the next step is the banking union. Well, any agreement has been made yet, so there is something to do. And if we do so, I think there is a good chance that we come out of the thing. Right different to anyone else, I think there was, at least in no country, someone who requested the people to leave the European Union. Even in Greece, the opposition parties mostly asked for sticking to the European Union and for sticking to the euro. They just say if they handle things in a special way, they will get more money from the rest of Europe. This was their political idea, and not to leave it. And I think no one will do things like this. I don't know, but I'm really optimistic on that question. So if we are together and are having bad moods against each other and thinking about what the other one should do and is not doing and things like this, this is not really a problem. This is something that you can solve. The problem would come up if all the people believe that they should go out of the European Union. But to my point of view, the people are more European than they were before the crisis, because they were very, they developed bad mood, but they never left the family. So this is a good strategy.
If I may augment what you just said, I think that since much of the crisis was a crisis of confidence in the integrity of the euro area, into the willingness of the member states to engage into activities helping the integrity, maintaining the integrity. If there was a political reason, like this election in Greece, everybody would understand that it's not because of these underlying problems or perceived problems. It would be something exogenous. So that would not pose the same problems as if we had the economic problems emerge again and have a crisis that comes out from economic failings.
Okay, I'll stop being so pessimistic then. But if I'm optimistic and say that this crisis will at least lead to a further integration of the European Union or the Eurozone, is it fair to say that we will be losing Great Britain along the way? And is that in German interest? Great Britain being a necessary counterpart to a much more state-oriented economy in France?
I think that would be terrible. I think that the European Union needs Britain as much as Britain needs the European Union. I think that the same basic argument holds here that Mayor Scholz made before. It's so obvious that you can hurt yourself by just exiting the European Union instead of rethinking the position according or towards the joint currency or entering into the joint currency in some years to come. I think it's so obvious that there's a self-defeating aspect into all the ideas and all the arguments of becoming more autark on the side of the UK.
Thank you. Considering the time, maybe we turn to the audience right there. We do have some microphones, right? Or maybe you can just speak up. There's one person behind you, and then Mr. Bütikofer.
Thank you. Both of you, Mayor Scholz and Professor Schmidt, you argued very strongly in favor of a banking union. So there's a common set of criteria for a single supervisory mechanism to make sure that European banks are healthy. But if I remember correctly, in 2007, the initial cause for the financial crisis was not Greek banks or Portuguese banks, but Lehman Brothers and Manhattan. So what's the point of having a European banking union if the next financial bubble in the United States will burst and will pull us down anyway? And the second question based on that is, don't we need a transatlantic mechanism to make sure that both the Federal Reserve and the ECB have criteria, so we have a common set of criteria for healthy banks?
Yeah. I think what your question points at or addresses is this problem of lumpy risks. If you have a macroprudential regulation, something that we didn't think about years ago, then you might be able to avoid a situation like that. One thing that I didn't mention, and you give me the opportunity to do so, is there are at least two additional steps that we would like to request, we would request from European policymakers to introduce. And one would be to ask banks, to request banks to have more equity, to have a lower leverage, more than even in the Basel III agreements, is set in the Basel III agreements in the moment, which is something that you can only introduce step by step and slowly, but still having more equity would make banks more resilient. And the other aspect would be to really risk weight also sovereign bonds. With only these two very simple, albeit very strong interventions, you could do a lot, which you don't have to do then with intelligent and sophisticated regulation.
I disagree with the both suggestions, to be very honest. I think that we must create a political strategy which reorganizes the confidence into government bonds. And it's absolutely necessary that we come back to a system which we had before, that anyone trusted at least European sovereign bonds. And it's necessary that we come back to this situation. And this is why we are doing all these different things with the banking union, with the fiscal compact and things like that, to gain again the confidence of the markets. And this is something we have to deal with. We cannot say we don't bother for the market, we don't bother for what the people think about the banks and about the states. We have to find a system where they agree again that it's useful to give the money to European banks and to European states in the end. So this is why I disagree concerning how we have to handle sovereign bonds. Concerning equity for the banks, I do agree on the long run. But I think we should have a strategy where we say there is an aim for 2030 and an aim for 2025 and things like that, and we want to go there, because it's quite difficult in a very complicated economic situation to increase the equity of the banks all in a very short moment. So we have to have a long-term strategy on this question. Concerning United States and European Union and the central banks, I think they should discuss with each other, but this is quite a difficult question. I think there will be debates for many years. If you look how difficult it is to come together with the banking union in the European Union, who is an organism which is working together, you can imagine how difficult it is to have a common strategy between the United States and the EU. So I think it's necessary to do so, but it will take time.
May I disagree again? Because of the interest rate spreads. I mean, you basically said you would like to have interest rate spreads of zero, if I understood correctly. Which, yeah, because then I'm not disagreeing, because the risk weighting, of course, only makes sense if there are different risk weights associated to, let's say, Italian bonds and German bonds. And that we had no risk spreads, no interest rate spreads whatsoever. That was a problem. We had exaggerated interest rate spread thereafter. And I think what we want to have is not zero interest rate spreads, but an interest rate spread that is just reflecting fundamentals. But as long as there are fundamental differences between the solidity of households in Italy and Germany, for example, there should also be interest rate spreads. If we don't disagree on that, then...
I don't disagree
okay.
on this question. I disagreed on the
risk weighting.
I disagreed on the question how we should handle the sovereign bonds and the banking accounts. So I thought this is what you wanted to mention. So there is a system we have where they are handled different than other money that the banks put to other places. And I think we should stick to the traditional system, and this is why we should work on a very stable system for the budgets of the European states.
Okay, we have Mr. Bütikofer in the front row and then the gentleman in the back.
Thank you. I wanna ask a growth-related question. The single most important selling argument in favor of TTIP has been the pervasive promise of growth. Now, you have cautioned us against overblown expectations, Professor Schmidt, and I think justifiably so. On the other hand, Olaf Scholz has said we cannot return to the old model of debt-fueled growth. So the question is there something else? For instance, in Greece, according to the numbers from the Greek government, manufacturing has decreased over the last 6 years by 35%, and it accounts today for just 9% of the GDP. and I assume that without growth, there's no way out of the crisis. So how can new growth be induced without relying on overblown trade assumptions or the old failures of debt-fueled growth?
I think that, for example, in Greece, we already see some first seeds growing of such a transition, namely a shift of labor, of enterprises to the traded sector, from the non-traded to the traded sector. You don't have to forget that the last years have been years of an adjustment towards the normal situation. That's what I wanted to characterize by this Kratochvilova parallel. The balance sheet recession that we have seen is a correction towards the normal state. And of course, it will be something that only slowly, year after year, has to be achieved. But Greece, Italy, Spain, they have to develop their own export sector. And they are starting to have success with that. You see that in the export statistics. You see it when you look at the wage statistics, where you look at labor cost in the non-traded sector and in the traded sector, and you see that in these countries labor costs are declining more strongly in the traded sector. That are all reasons for some hope, because if you look into, everybody or most of you will know growth accounting exercises. You decompose the growth rate, the actual growth rate, into 3 steps. One is reflecting capital accumulation, one is reflecting the changes in the volume of labor, of hours or something, or some labor measure, and the third part, the residual part, would capture everything, technical progress, the way you organize things, and so on. Usually this technical progress is a positive number. And you see in Portugal, in Greece, and in other countries in the periphery that the growth rates in the years before the crisis were reflecting negative TFP, total factor productivity growth. And that's reflecting all the things that went wrong. Money being available, loans being given, but being given into, then put into wrong investments. One fun fact, if I may, Germany is often accused of running this very high trade surplus or current account surplus. If you look at the net foreign asset position of Germany, it will run roughly between 40 and 60% of GDP. I think it's now 60%. If the crisis hadn't destroyed values that were not really there to be destroyed, but corrected values, we would run at 80%. So we have already paid, some of the Germans basically have paid for some of the crisis by their investments going abroad, down the drain.
Would you like to add, or?
I think the most important question is that you have to develop an industry which is able to work on the world market. And this is related to Mittelstand industries, as I already mentioned in my first speech, and this has something to do with the bigger companies. They have to produce something which they could sell in the world market, and it's necessary to help them that they could do so, but in the end you cannot just change figures and hope that in the end there is more income, because if there is no one producing something which you can which is useful in the world markets or on the European markets, it won't help you. And this is something which sometimes the people forget when they discuss about economic figures. They just look at their numbers, but they don't understand that there's some reality behind it. And if there is a reality with good numbers but with no competitive industry, the problems will come.
Yeah. One example is you have indices of non-price competitiveness. Like, for example, how long does it take to open a business in a country? And you see that in the peripheral countries, this index value has been rising over time. So they have already improved the structure for entrepreneurial effort, entrepreneurial creativity to get more leverage. And that's exactly the way to go. It needs to come, I agree, from fundamentals. It needs to come from the entrepreneurs, from the companies and their workers. It cannot come from government policy, and it especially cannot come from German advice only. I think that would be something none of us would support, I guess.
Okay, the gentleman in the back, and then even though the FAZ is not known for its Frauenquote, then you. Please. The one raising his hand. Yeah.
My name is Fritjof Hansen, TLT Associates in Beverly Farms. Massachusetts. My question is pertaining to the income distribution in Germany. The ECB published last year data that said that the layout of a German average household is $16,000 a year. That is a lot less than the average layout of Greece, Cyprus, or France. These were countries that solicited loans from Germany and financial help. What is happening with the surpluses that Germany has? And that Germany also has generously distributed to other countries, for instance, the ECB, when the Bundesbank in 2012 transferred $500 billion to the ECB, and that saved a lot of banks in Western Europe. There is a lot of money that came from Germany, also to Greece. Greece got more than $100 billion of German money. Where is it coming from, and what happens to the German consumer? How far is the income distribution just to the German consumer? Does the German taxpayer and the consumer pay for all these financial layouts that are being given to other countries?
Who was this question directed to?
I can at least start answering it. Comparing wealth figures across countries is very difficult, especially since you have a high share of house owners in some European countries, and the value of their assets is, of course, the current market value, which might be, again, overblown at the point of being measured. And in Germany, you have especially a low share of house owners. That already accounts for a lot of the difference, and it's much less infuriating if you look at the figure without this component being entered. Nevertheless, I think it's true that you find in the crisis countries, in some of them at least, and anecdotal evidence is abundant for that. You find people who don't pay taxes or don't pay taxes in the amounts that we would probably in the functioning tax system like we have in Germany. And still, since the people hit by the crisis are the poor ones in these economies, I think it's a responsibility, and we cannot really wind ourselves out of this responsibility. We cannot avoid it. It's certainly the responsibility to nevertheless engage into European rescue measures, although you see the inequalities. Of course, addressing economic inequality, income inequality is first and foremost the responsibility of the nation states, of the member states. A little fun fact on the side, the German inequality has peaked of personal income, has peaked 2005. So it's now at least not higher than before, probably a little bit lower, which is interesting. If you look at the German discussion from the outside, you will probably read that German inequality has really skyrocketed. That's not true.
That's something a social democrat would want to add to, right?
No. I would just say that it's very difficult to understand how the different wealth in the different countries comes to the figures we read in the newspapers and in other statistics. And this is there. It's something I always looked at. What may be the reasons? And I read all the different articles and expertises about this. And in the end, I would say no one can say today. It's very difficult to have a good answer to this question. But I have one result. Those countries who have the biggest difference between the rich and the poor have the lowest development of the economy. All the crisis states are more unjust. So it's a good argument to stick to a course of social welfare state in Germany.
Well, that's always the issue of cause and consequence, which is difficult and tricky, but...
Yes, but my opinion is clear.
Okay, we have one question there in the second row.
Hi, my name is Friederike Reuter. I study economics here, and I'd like to ask a question on the European Central Bank. During the crisis, we've sort of seen two different periods of the European Central Bank. One previously under Jean-Claude Trichet, which was where the European Central Bank took a more passive role, whereas what we've recently seen under Mario Draghi is a more active role of the European Central Bank of buying bonds, something that resembles more to the Federal Reserve Bank here in the United States, and something that right now has been challenged by a German court. And my question is to you, what do you see the future of the European Central Bank's role in Europe and in the economy if this sort of expanded vision of the European Central Bank's mandate is something that could possibly be institutionalized, or if that is something that is of a danger to the European economic foundation?
Yeah. I think that if you look with a second view on the figures, you see that the ECB has behaved much more than the Bundesbank, or like the Bundesbank, than all the other big national banks, like the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of England. They have bought much more bonds, reflecting, among other things, of course, that enterprises in Germany are very much financed by banks. The banks have to be stabilized, but there is no bond market for enterprises in the same degree. So there are differences in terms of structure. Then there are differences in terms of period. When Draghi and the Trichet period, one was a period where the crisis has really been exploding. And the OMT announcement in 2012 was basically the last measure really saving the euro from disintegrating. And you see that third aspect or third fact is that you see the balance sheet of the ECB shrinking while the others are still expanding. So there is a lot of difference. And I think that the ECB will, in the end, have to adhere to the principle of separation of monetary and fiscal policy. That's exactly what the German Constitutional Court requests, that in the end, the OMT program or any other programs and efforts by the ECB maintain, at least after solving an acute crisis, maintain the principle of having a separate and independent monetary policy that is not entangled with the fiscal responsibilities. What has happened in the OMT, or what was the problem of the OMT, was especially this conditionality that President Draghi said, well, we are willing and able to buy up any bond of an ailing state up to an unlimited amount if it submits to an ESM program or an ESFS program. This is tying it to this conditionality ties it to the fiscal side, and that's exactly what the German Constitutional Court finds problematic. The tragic thing about it is that since the fiscal side was at this impasse, the 17 sovereigns being aware of the ECB as the lender of last resort, being able and willing to really jump in if the crisis escalated, that that impasse would have been overcome by some conditionality like that, but it's not allowed. So in the end, we will end up with monetary policy being unconditional, and whether that's much better has to be seen.
I think the ECB did a good job. In the end, the European Union and the institutions of the European Union must always be able to say to the markets, we are able to defend our currency, don't try. And we need someone who's able to say this. If we develop other institutions within Europe who are able to give the markets the answer, don't try, don't speculate against the euro, don't speculate against one of our member states, we are stronger than you, then we would have a problem. And this is what the ECB did at the right moment. So they did a good job in the end, to be very clear about this question. And I think that it is nothing that could be solved by courts, neither the German nor the European. We have to develop a system where someone is able to give this answer. If this is not the ECB because someone else is able to do so, it's fine. But if there's no one else as the ECB, they will continue to give the same answer they did in the past, and it's necessary to understand this. And if we want to be successful, we need a strong Europe that can tell the markets that we are stronger than they.
I'm already receiving signs and signals that we're supposed to stop this discussion. So thank you very much, Mayor Scholz, Professor Schmidt. And the good news is good news is I think there's lunch waiting for us, right?